All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Joanna Wozniak-Brown, and I'm the Assistant Director of Resilience Planning at the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. I'm pleased to welcome you to the fifth in a series of webinars about climate change and public health. Today, we'll hear about the connections between recreational water and climate change. I want to let you know that this is the fifth out of six, and on Thursday, we have emergency preparedness presentations in honor of National Preparedness Month. Great. Our presenter today is Bill Lucey from Long Island Soundkeeper and Save the Sound. Raised in Connecticut, Bill grew up fishing local waters before earning a fisheries biology bachelor's of science at the University of Vermont and a graduate certificate in fisheries management from Oregon State University. He served in Guatemala as a Peace Corps fisheries extensionist before moving to Alaska for 20 years, where he worked as a federal fish and wildlife biologist, commercial fisherman, and a coastal program coordinator. In 2014, he became the director of the Kauai Invasive Species Committee with the University of Hawaii. Since 2017, he's patrolled the rivers and estuary of Long Island Sound, advocating for fishable, swimmable, and drinkable water with Save the Sound. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please post them in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. As a reminder, the presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to view this webinar and all of Circa's webinars on our YouTube page following the event. So now I'll turn the presentation over to Bill.
Okay. I'm going to share the screen and get that out of the way. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My topic is going to be about the effects of climate change on recreational waters in Connecticut, both freshwater and saltwater. As was stated, I'm Bill Lucey, Long Island Soundkeeper, and my parent organization is Save the Sound. So what is Save the Sound? For those of you who haven't heard of us, we're a regional group, and it's actually our 40th anniversary. We started as Connecticut Fund for the Environment, and we recently merged several groups and call ourselves simply Save the Sound. And we work on climate change, land preservation, do a lot with working on water quality, and we have a strong restoration component. And this is a map that gives you a better idea of both spatially where we work and the diversity of projects that we have. We do have in-house attorneys, so we have a number of legal actions. We utilize the Clean Water Act on the benefit of citizens to ensure clean water. We also work with direct pollution events. For example, there was some of you may be aware, there was a 2 million gallon sewage spill in New Haven this summer, and we were able to get out there and do some testing, and our attorneys followed up and trying to get to the bottom of the spill, why it happened, and why the public wasn't notified when they were out fishing or swimming in the affected area. We have an incredible water monitoring program. This area, it's based out of Mamaroneck, but we work sound-wide. These small orange circles are regular bacteria testing sites, and we use those to look for places that have chronically poor bacteria, fecal bacteria results, which indicate there's problems with infrastructure. And I'm going to touch on the infrastructure issue with climate change and recreation quite a bit. We also have these orange bays and harbors all around the Sound. We have 23 groups. We're close to 40 bays and harbors. And all these groups are monitoring water quality, basically taking a pulse of the aquatic health of the Sound. We also have a green infrastructure program. So in New Haven, for example, we have a number of rain gardens and bioswales. We have a proposal in to design another 100 for Bridgeport. We also did some work over in Long Island, greening up a parking lot to divert stormwater that was pouring directly into the state park there and doing some wetland restoration. Land preservation has been a big part of our program for many years. We've preserved over 18,000 acres in the state. Recent additions, Greenwich, and then we lead a coalition of over 100 groups. We help coordinate that to have Plum Island transferred from the federal government into public lands for both people to access and wildlife preservation. We also do a lot of fish passage projects, removing culverts, putting in fish ladders, taking down dams, and pertaining to this talk, we have an active climate program, mostly in Connecticut, and we do a lot of work at the legislature to try and promote policies that will help us get to a carbon reduced future and do our part to reduce climate change. And then going on right now, if anyone's interested, we have a number of cleanups. We're the International Coastal Cleanup Coordinator for the state of Connecticut. We're doing it virtually this year, most of them, some in person. And we did, I believe, 72 cleanups last year with 2,500 volunteers. So that's just an idea of the diversity of our organization. What I do is I cruise around in a boat and I look for pollution, but I also am a registered lobbyist. I'm also a trained scientist, and I do a lot of work with in partnerships with research. So, but the topic of today is recreating in Connecticut on the water, and it takes many forms. The title slide was of swimming. That's obviously a big one. These guys over here are out in the early days of COVID, had cabin fever and grabbed some kayaks. This is Black Rock Harbor in Bridgeport. This is our water quality manager with his partner, and they're out clamming and oystering for fun. And this is a picture of my boy who loves to go fishing in the freshwater lakes and streams around our part of Connecticut. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover. We're going to look closely at how climate change is affecting our wastewater infrastructure, which can lead to a lot of other problems, sewage and nutrients getting into our waters. Now climate change is warming up Long Island Sound and our lakes and rivers, and how that temperature reacts and its effect on human pathogens and the risk to us when we recreate. It also has a direct impact on the prevalence and scope of harmful algal blooms. And the warming waters are changing fish distribution. So recreational opportunities to go fishing are going to change, have changed, and are going to continue to change. And then a little bit on invasive species and the forecast for what might happen with jellyfish in Long Island Sound. And then finally, I want to introduce our revamped Sound Health Explorer, which is a tool that the public can use to look at their local areas where they go swimming and use the beaches. So the first part of this overwhelmed infrastructure idea are septic systems. This is a depth to water, groundwater map for Long Island. It's a single source aquifer, so it's much easier for USGS to get a groundwater model. In Connecticut, it's difficult because there's a lot more bedrock and clay seams. The glacial activity over there has made it so there's not a uniform groundwater, what you find over Long Island. But the point is, if you have a septic system that's low down in this area, you have storm surge and sea level rise, there's going to be a front where that water comes up into your leach field or your cesspool and pulls those nutrients and potentially bacteria out into the water where people are fishing and swimming. This is a big one that we work on. We're very active in trying to improve sewage collection all the way from New York City out to Long Island and Eastern Connecticut. We have these storms that are coming now and dumping 2-3 inches of rain, these more intense storms that are projected to increase. And what happens with that is if you have a town, and there's still 6 towns that have these combined sewer overflows, these CSOs, and what happens is the waste mixes with stormwater in one pipe, and during an outburst event with rain, the sewage treatment plants will be overwhelmed and their equipment damaged if you run all that water through there, plus they won't be able to adequately treat the sewage. So they are permitted to shunt that extra flow directly out other outfalls, combined sewer overflows. And that's partially treated or not treated, and it's quite significant. Anywhere from 500 million to 1 billion gallons of this is released in Connecticut waters every year, according to conversations with DEEP. Over here is a picture of the water quality in Black Rock Harbor, which has 3 or 4, potentially more if you include Ash Creek, which comes in at the head of the bay. So there's a number of CSO outburst events every year. And you can see in the middle of summer what the water quality looks like there from that chronic discharge. This picture here was taken on Rye Brook in Westchester County. This is what's called a sanitary sewer overflow. So when you have inflow and infiltration, I and I, old pipes, clay pipes, they don't fit together. You have tree roots growing into them, and you have these intense rainfalls. They can get overwhelmed with water mixing with sewage, and they can blow out the top of these manhole covers, especially if the manhole covers are in poor shape. So that's a chronic problem that's putting bacteria and nutrients, raw sewage, into our waters. I just want to mention, I mentioned the spill in New Haven. We have been working on a sewage right to know. So this is where recreators can find out if they have a spill. If you want to go swimming or fishing or throw a ball for your dog in the water, you want to know if there's pollution. And we passed a law in 2012 to create this sewage right to know. We amended it and made it stronger in 2018, mandating electronic reporting and including downstream communities. But it failed in New Haven. People were not notified in a manner to protect themselves while they were recreating. So this next session, we're going to try and strengthen it and create more of an alert system so people can know when it's safe to go swimming. And then finally, with the infrastructure, we have stormwater pollution. So we have a lot of impervious surface. And with these increased rain events, we are constantly getting these runoff and localized flooding situations. And when you combine that with a high tide, like here in Stratford on Bruce Brook, you get backing up of water, and it brings in all the dog waste and animal waste and whatever toxins are on the ground and put that into the water that we use. So that leads to the first topic specifically of what's going to change with climate and recreation is human pathogens in the waterway. So this table or graphic is from a comparative risk assessment, and it shows this bottom area. You're always going to have disease in water. There's always going to be waterborne diseases, just because that's part of the natural system. But as things warm up, rain patterns change, temperatures change, they get warmer, you have a longer season, which these pathogens can breed and multiply. We're going to get a large increase. These are different scenarios of magnitude of how much increase we can expect. And they use diarrhea as a metric. That's a common symptom of a waterborne disease. And you've all heard about people swimming or surfing in Los Angeles after a rain event, and they have to wait 3 days so they don't get rashes when they head out. And one more thing I want to mention about this is, by the way, is a hepatitis virus, is that increased storms come with wind and waves. And so a lot of these viruses live in the sediments, and they can become suspended in the water column and then therefore come into contact with people. And then I wanted to focus on just one pathogen because it's relevant, is this Vibrio, the Vibrio species. There's over 80 of them. 12 of them are harmful to humans. This graphic is from Bozzi and Dubrow. It just came out last week from Yale, their climate change and health report. And even though it's low, it's still one case per 100,000. You can see an upward trend in Vibrio related illnesses. Now, not all of these are necessarily attributed to swimming, but we do have an active monitoring program, V. parahemolyticus, which the state aquaculture checks shellfish. And we did have an outbreak in 2013, and they changed the handling procedures for shellfish in Long Island Sound to have early chilling. So when they harvest shellfish, or you go out and harvest shellfish in your local bed, make sure you put it right on ice. And what that does is it stops the bacteria from multiplying in that shellfish to where it might make you sick. And these are the three that cause most of the cases in the United States. And the fear is, as things warm up and more rain changes the river flow situations, changing how much water is brackish or more conducive to some of these Vibrio species, we're going to see a lot more infections. And there's a study in the Baltic Sea that showed the Baltic Sea is fairly similar to Long Island Sound. It's a large, shallow inland sea that gets warm, and they're looking at double the rates. And this is a picture of the outbreak, the flesh-eating bacteria of Vibrio. And there it goes. So we had 5 outbreaks in August and September in Connecticut. We've been getting a lot of calls and questions about it. So all the people that were infected were swimming in Long Island Sound, and they had open wounds. And how does it get to them? Well, this Vibrio lives in the sediment, and when it gets up into the water column, it can attach to that sediment during one of these storm events that disturbs the sediment, or when it's up in the water column and there's a big algae bloom, we have zooplankton that graze on that algae, and one of those zooplankton are copepods, and they have a chitinous shell. They're like a microscopic clam, and that's a very good surface for these Vibrio bacteria to attach to. Also lobsters and crabs. You probably heard about the crab fishermen down in North Carolina that are dealing with these big blooms from the hog factories down there, and they're catching crabs and they're sharp and they're getting cuts and they're getting these infections. So one good thing about the Vibrio V is that it's very rare in Connecticut still. It's very common, however, in the Gulf of Mexico, and the waters are warmer down there. And by midsummer, there's Vibrio detected in all the oysters in the Gulf of Mexico. So you can imagine as things warm up, we're going to start seeing more of this species, which is pretty dangerous to swimmers, occurring in Long Island Sound. And how are we going to avoid that? This is a picture of a model that's a risk assessment. They have an operational one in Chesapeake. Circa NOAA paid UConn to develop one for Long Island Sound. It's no longer funded. And what it does, though, is it picks out areas where it's likely to run into Vibrio. And you can warn people about crabbing or swimming or fishing in these areas based on this model, and maybe direct them, instead of going into this area to go crabbing, you would go up here or over here. Hopefully we can get to an operational model in Long Island Sound. Our unified water study may be in a position to help with that, since we're already monitoring 40 bays and harbors. That will really help protect people in the future as it becomes more of a problem. So just a reminder, chill your seafood very early. That stops the issue. Protect your wounds. Don't go in the water if you can. If you don't, if you have a wound, and if you get one, use lots of soap and water. So I'm going to move on to harmful algal blooms. This is another reaction to climate change, and we're getting warmer temperatures in our lakes and Long Island Sound. The problem of HABs are more common right now in freshwater lakes in New York and Connecticut. This photo actually was taken by our water quality monitoring crew in Milton Harbor in New York, and this was a HAB last year that we saw in salt water, brackish water. You have all the carbon dioxide deposition. You have the changes in rainfall patterns bringing in nutrients, iron, stormwater runoff. These can help increase these HABs. One interesting thing I found was that intensifying of coastal upwelling can change the pH, which has an effect, and can also bring in more phosphorus, which adds to the mix. And as the sea level comes up, it's going to move the potential sweet spot for these to form farther up our lower river systems. This is a picture of a dog swimming in a HAB infested water. I think could be dockweed, but I think it's HAB. And it's dangerous for animals. When I was a marine mammal strander in Alaska, I used to have to cut up the whale stump, cut open the whales, take the stomachs, and preserve them and send them to the NOAA fisheries lab to look for domoic acid, which is another toxin from algae, which would potentially killing these whales and causing these mass strandings. There was also a recent situation in Botswana where over 300 elephants died when they're at a watering hole that had a cyanobacteria bloom, and they all drank the water and they all died. And my screen is locking up. Bear with me. There it goes. So we do have HABs in fresh water. They've been at lower levels. This is Environmental Working Group graphic. It's higher in New York, probably more people down here, and you have agricultural inputs up here. And I put this disclaimer up here because when this map was made, the cutoff for safety notification to swimmers and boaters was 4 micrograms per liter, and the EPA just changed it a couple Mays ago to 8 micrograms. But if you see water like this is in Putnam in New York, these kayakers are probably not going to go out in that water, because when you're kayaking, you're splashing water and you don't want to get those HABs into your mouth. I just have a quick slide on invasive jellyfish, or excuse me, invasive species and jellyfish. And we have had invasive species come into Long Island Sound based on warm water. So the Gulf Stream can bring things up. We have had some lionfish outbreaks, but the water gets too cold in the winter and they have not established a local population. Lionfish have big impacts on the fish community wherever they become established. But as the waters warm more and we start getting milder and milder winters, it's very plausible that we could have a lionfish established in Long Island Sound. What was really interesting to me was a model on jellyfish prevalence globally. And jellyfish are really good at dealing with warm water, low oxygen, and pollution nutrients that can cause low oxygen. And why is that important for recreation? Well, the beaches will get closed down if there's a big population of, say, sea wasps off your coast. You can't go in the water without getting stung, or even walking down the beach and getting stung. So people will cancel their vacations. You can get hurt by some of the species. And, you know, if you're out swimming long distance and get tired and you've been stung multiple times, it's not common, but you could drown. Jellyfish also will change the fish community. They will eat zooplankton, fish eggs, basically fish larvae, little tiny fish, and they can transfer vectors or parasites. But if you look at our area, this is red. Red is that the populations will increase with climate change with a high degree of confidence. So this model suggests we're going to see a big rise in jellyfish as climate change continues. And then my favorite topic is recreational fishing. So I look at guys out on a West Haven beach, and they're fishing, hoping to bring home something for dinner. And it is fun, but during COVID-19, a lot of communities, especially communities that were more geared towards service industry jobs and the lower income jobs, have been laid off. So fishing at this point, I've seen a lot more people fishing in Long Island Sound lately are doing it for food. You can get a big bag of rice and go catch a mess of fish, and you can have a nutritious meal, and it's not that expensive. So if you're unemployed, this becomes a real issue. And that the types of species we're going to be able to catch is going to potentially change. Now, this is from a paper that looked at the Connecticut trawl data. So every year for many years, Penny Howell started this, I think 40 years ago. They've been doing trawls in Long Island Sound and looking at the fisheries composition, the diversity, the abundance, and the age structure. And what this paper did was break the fish species down into cold temperature gilled fish and warm fish. So there seems to be a magic spot here at about 20 degrees Celsius where you're really, or thereabouts, where you're really favoring the warm fish, and the cold fish aren't so common. So what does that mean? I'm going to use lobsters as an example. So here's a 20-degree mark. So there's been a correlation with ocean temperatures above 20 degrees that have a very negative impact on lobster survival. So if you look from 1980 up to 1999, just before it, you had many, many years with colder water temperatures. You had a few warm ones, but there were several years for the lobsters to breed and recover. In 1999, we had an incredible warm spike. We had a lot of nitrogen and pollution in Long Island Sound. We had spraying for mosquitoes, which may have affected the nearshore nursery areas for some of the lobsters, and we had a massive crash. I used to fish lobster back around here just for a little while, and we caught massive amounts of lobsters. And after this, it was almost over. And if you look at the trends, the number of 20-degree days is just drastically increasing. And I believe there was only 12 fishermen that caught over 1,000 pounds of lobsters in Long Island Sound last year. Basically, the fishery is over. It's too hot for the lobsters. Here's another graphic showing the same trend. Winter flounder used to be a big deal to go out and catch winter flounder. Lots of them when I was a kid back around here, and they've just completely decreased, probably because of warming temperatures and silt buildup in their nursery areas. Where on the other hand, black sea bass, which most of the commercial quota is assigned down in the Carolinas, are having a big explosion in population, and recreational anglers are catching a lot of these. Cold water, warm water. Same thing in fresh water. If you look at our river herring landings, we still had a lot of dams back here, but you had a regime shift of climate shift on the west coast, which is east coast, and it just crashed. So these are AOI's blueback herrings. They're in real bad shape. They haven't recovered in 40 years, and it's getting warmer and warmer. And if you go over to this graphic, it's fairly striking. This is eastern brook trout. This is their habitat and their range. And if it's red, greater than 50% reduction in the existing habitat, look at Connecticut, bright red. We've actually lost 75% of our brook trout cold water refuge in the last 30 years. So when I was a kid, we used to catch wild brook trout all the time. And now when I go back to those areas, I do not see them at all. So a lost recreation opportunity. So the last thing I want to discuss is our newly revamped Sound Health Explorer. This is a great tool. We've got the framework set up. We really hope to add a lot of interactive data to this. It's focused on swimmable, fishable, and livable seas and Long Island Sound. And the core of this is our beach grades. So what we do with this website is every beach along Long Island Sound that's publicly accessible has to have regular testing for fecal bacteria in order to tell the public that it's safe to swim. That data is then put in the EPA database called STORET, and our website mines that data, runs it through a basic model to come up with a grade. So if you want to go swimming down in Douglas Manor here, it's got a D-. You probably got a problem right there, and that problem is rising sea level and leaching septics. That's definitely one of the problems there. Out here, you have some bad beaches. There might be some sort of infrastructure problem here. You've got some good beaches out here. But it's just a tool for recreational users to go and see if their beaches are clean. And if they're not, that should spur some local action to try and figure out why and then fix that problem. We also have a sea level rise viewer on here. I was gonna, Joanna wanted me to use the Circa sea level rise viewer, but it was offline. They have a really good one. NOAA has one as well. I think the Circa viewer is getting the parcel data added to it, so individual homeowners can see what's going to happen with their property lines. I'm just guessing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joanna. But we're going to lose our beaches. We're going to lose some boat ramps and some marinas, and that's a big deal because we already have an equity problem with people getting to the beaches. If you go to the Western Sound and you use our viewer, you can break the beaches down into private beaches, public beaches with different permit requirements, what the parking issues. And when you click on that around Westchester County and Queens and the Nassau County area close to the city, many of those beaches are private. The public can't use them. So they have to go farther up the Sound, and then they run into parking area restrictions or outrageous costs to get to the beach, or they need town permits. So if you're not fortunate enough to be from a coastal town or have waterfront property, it's going to be increasingly difficult for people to access Long Island Sound, which is a public waterway. And this is West Haven, Sandy Point Bird Sanctuary. And this is a 2-foot, just high tide flooding. So this beach is going to get really small around here. This is Oldfield Creek. This is a favorite beach. It's a beautiful stretch of beach that these folks who live in West Haven can walk down and access. Now with a 4-foot rise, which we're not expected to see till past the end of the century, this is going to be basically inaccessible and gone. So that's definitely going to be something to watch in the future because you cannot migrate the beach back. A lot of times there's roads there, there's private property, there's businesses, there's apartment buildings. So this is going to be a serious situation in the future. So with that cheerful news for everybody, I can answer any questions that we have.
Thanks, Bill. That was fantastic. You covered a lot of topics in a time crunch. I really appreciate that. We'll just switch over our slides to the question and answer slide. We have some more questions coming in too. Second. There we go. So one of the first questions was, what are the 6 towns that have the combined sewer overflows?
Okay, you have Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, Norwalk, New Haven, and I believe Norwich. You can go online to the Sewage Right to Know website and you can actually look to see them, but you can also go to our Sound Health Explorer.org, and I recommend everybody do that. And please send us suggestions of what you'd like to see on there. There's actually a button you can click. You can check a box, and it shows all the combined sewer overflow locations in the state.
Thank you. Somebody just said that they think New London also.
Okay, New London. Yeah, it might be New London and not Norwich.
All right.
It's one of those.
Somebody asks or says that they live in Fairfield, and over the past few years, we've seen tons of small slipper-like shells on the beaches. What are those, and why are we now seeing them?
Well, those are those are slipper shells. That's exactly what they're called. And that they are, and I had some questions about this over time, and they are a reaction to over nutrification. So when you get a lot of stormwater that's nitrogen enriched, if you think about the highway corridor, your tailpipes are blowing out nitrogen oxides, that's fertilizer. If you think about putting fertilizer on your lawn or your garden and it rains and it washes out, that's nitrogen fertilizer. If you have broken sewer pipes or these CSOs, those are dropping in fertilizer as well. And so that creates a really conducive environment for these slipper shells to flourish because it creates food, their primary food, their algae-based food, and they have a good time eating that.
That's great. Somebody asks, what is the time frame for the projected 2 feet sea level rise, 25 years or 50 years? And I'll just comment that Circa put out a report, our executive director, Dr. Jim O'Donnell, has a report, and the recommendations in that report which were legislated under Public Act, I think it's 18-82, or 8, yeah, I think it's 18-82, that we're planning for 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050. So that's just under 2 feet in 30 years. So that's not a very long time horizon. So is there anything you want to follow up on that, Bill?
Yeah, no, that's right. 20 to 30 years, we should probably see that. Now, one thing I will note is these projections keep accelerating. That's what's legislated right now. I think that's a pretty good number.
Yeah, there's definitely a range, but the report found that was probably a good planning horizon. But definitely, if we have the highest RCP and we don't do anything to slow the greenhouse gas emissions, unfortunately, we might be looking at a much more dire situation, even more dire. Yeah. So another question is, what are some things that municipalities and health departments should be doing to address some of these issues?
Well, a few things. One, I know Brantford established a resiliency fund. So if their budget was surplus, they got permission from the state to be able to invest that in a riskier account to try and grow the money quicker. And with that money, they can use it to match grant projects that deal with resiliency, sea level rise, flooding properties, maybe raising up some bridges. The other thing is the municipalities should be working with their wastewater treatment plants to apply for clean water funding at the state level. So the Connecticut has a very progressive clean water fund, which provides low interest loans and grants for upgrading sewage wastewater plants. Are focused mostly on CSOs right now, but you can upgrade plants. And then we would like to see more money focused on fixing collection systems and making sure they're resilient so they're not getting flooded out. And then we work a lot with health departments. They're doing a pretty good job of their beach testing. We also need to expand HAB testing in the state. Our lab is looking at maybe doing that service. I know the aquaculture crew does a little bit of that. And then they also test for Vibrio. So the state aquaculture lab tests. They test. I think they do 6,000 to 8,000 water samples for bacteria, and then they do a lot of shellfish tissue testing to make sure it's safe. So just getting ready. I mean, we need to have plans to back off the coasts, manage retreat, and we need to make sure we're able to notify citizens of these spills too. So when you go out, there's a big sewage spill coming at you, you get a little ringtone on your cell phone and that they get all the signs posted in a timely manner.
Another question is, are wastewater treatment plants that discharge to a waterway required to have an action plan for projected sea level rise?
If they use clean water funds, yes, I believe it's either a rule or it's legislated. I can't remember. But if you are going to get state public money, some of it's federal, but most of it's state, you have to have a resiliency plan in place to spend that money. So let's say you want to replace a pump station down in West Haven and it's within the potential flood zone in 30, 40, 50 years. You need to construct that pump station to handle that for the life of the project, to handle that sea level rise or the overflow from stormwater events or whatever. So yes, they're supposed to.
We have another question that just came in. You mentioned that in 50 plus years, many beaches will be gone as they have no room to migrate in. What are your thoughts on things like breakwaters and other harder structures that might protect beaches?
Excuse me. I'm not a big fan of breakwaters because what they can end up doing is creating rip currents. So depending on where they're situated, they'll erode downstream. You'll see I see lots of hard shoreline along Long Island Sound, and with the longshore transport, the current, the person down below, if they don't have a rocky beach, they're going to scour out. There are places where it's a good idea to use those, especially offshore, but we promote living shorelines. So what we would like to see is reestablishment of a lot of oyster reefs because they will grow up with if the water quality is good, they'll grow with sea level rise, and they'll also trap some sediment behind them, which allow the salt marshes to start accreting. Right now, we're losing all the salt marshes, and we don't have a lot of the natural oyster reefs that we used to, say, 200 years ago, that broke up those waves. And the nice thing about oyster reefs, if you do them right, the taxpayer is not on the hook for redoing them later on, like a breakwater that gets broken apart. So we promote more living shorelines to protect the beaches. But that being said, each situation is unique.
So we that was really interesting. Circa's doing a lot of work on living shorelines too. So that's something that we're keeping an our eye on as a one strategy to be dealing with this, especially from the equity standpoint. If we're losing a lot of the recreational access to beaches, and Connecticut has a very built up coastline, so it's a little bit difficult to manage. So what are some of the things that we should DEEP or maybe other environmental organizations should be looking at for inland fishing opportunities if we're going to be the temperatures changing for our freshwater ecosystems?
That's a great question. So I know DEEP is really struggling on how to quantify these cold water refugia for trout. And we've had discussions with them. I do have a drone with an infrared camera that I haven't tested out yet. I just got it, and maybe flying some areas looking where springs can come in. And those would be areas where the native trout might be able to hold over during these droughts. Another thing is to work with the water companies. In the Bridgeport system, they do have some bottom release dams, and the Farmington as well, which is why they're good trout areas. So the water lower down in the reservoir is cooler, and they can release that cold water and make an artificially cold stream. So those are a couple of inland issues. And then as far as the HABs, which really impact fishing, I know some senators on the environmental committee, bipartisan, have been trying to work on advanced or alternative septic treatments. And what those do is they remove sometimes up to 80 to 90% of the nitrogen that's in the leach field. Most of your standard leach fields don't denitrify in the leach field, and a lot of nitrogen passes out into groundwater. And if you're around a lake system, it goes in there and it can add to these harmful algal blooms. So if we can work on permitting and allow homeowners, they do it in Long Island, but we have some financial constraints in Connecticut. We could really make sure that our human waste is fully treated in individual systems, or maybe a group of a few houses do one, so we're not polluting those lakes, and that way we can cut down on the number of HAB events, so it's still open for fishing and then swimming.
And one of the challenges for our lake systems in Connecticut is that they are usually shared by, we have a lot that are shared by municipalities. And so the zoning regulations and inspections might be a little bit different for each town. So it's definitely a partnership opportunity that needs to happen. So we have another question that says, I'm seeing more crabs lately. Will we be getting a large crab population over time that might replace the lobster fisheries? And I think this will be our last question, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I would think so. I've had a little bit of pushback on that, but basically your blue crab will go out into deeper water. You know, they're spawning right now up in the estuaries. People are catching a lot of crab, and then they go back out to deep water in the winter. And I think the sexes sort of separate. But if the winter is warm and mild, more of those crabs survive. And so then there's more to breed in the future. So I think as we get that 20-degree day that was hard on lobsters is going to benefit the crab, especially as it extends that season, warm water into the wintertime, which increases overwintering survival. So yeah, I would say without full empirical evidence that assessment is probably correct.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate your presentation today. And folks want to join us on Thursday for our emergency preparedness webinar. They can sign up at the short link that's in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you so much, Bill, and I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.